The morning sun had just begun to pierce through the mist that clung to Arlington National Cemetery, casting long, somber shadows across the endless rows of white headstones. Jack Harlon's boots crunched softly against the gravel path as he approached the tomb of the unknown soldier. His uniform was perfectly pressed, his gloves spotless, his cap brim sharp enough to catch the light like a blade. This was not merely routine. This was ritual. Jack was a man of few words and fewer smiles. At 48, his face bore the fine lines of someone who had seen war and outlived too many comrades. His eyes, steel gray and unblinking, scanned the perimeter as if daring the world to disturb the silence of this sacred ground. The tomb stood before him, a massive marble sarcophagus glowing pale in the dawn. To others, it was a monument. To Jack, it was a vow. He paused at the edge of the mat, inhaling deeply. Each breath reminded him of the countless soldiers whose breath had been stolen by battle. Each step forward was measured, precise. 21 steps, a pivot, 21 seconds of stillness. It was a dance he had performed thousands of times, yet every single time felt like the first. The crowd had not yet arrived. This moment was his alone. As he walked, the memories returned like ghosts. He saw the face of Corporal Jameson, the young recruit who had taken the bullet meant for him. He heard the last radio call of Sergeant Willis cut short by an explosion. He remembered the letter he had written to a widow, his hand shaking as he tried to find words that could possibly carry the weight of her husband's sacrifice. Jack's jaw tightened, but he kept marching. His duty was to be unshakable, even as the ghosts pressed against his heart. Far off, a bugle sounded, and not part of the ceremony, just a training note from another section of the cemetery, but it pierced Jack's chest like a spear. Music had always done that to him. It was why he had volunteered for the Guard after retirement from active duty. He needed the silence, the discipline, the way this post demanded perfection. Here there was no room for chaos, only order, precision, and memory. When the first visitors arrived, Jack could sense them even without looking. The air shifted. Whispers began. Tourists, schoolchildren, veterans leaning on canes. Some came for curiosity, some for reverence. Jack's expression never changed. He was no longer a man in that moment. He was the embodiment of respect itself. Then he saw the casket. It was not scheduled, and yet it came. A small procession approaching from the South Road, led by an army chaplain and 6 pallbearers in full dress. The burial detail had requested permission to pass by the tomb before heading to the gravesite. Jack halted mid-step and turned sharply to face them. His rifle came to his shoulder in a slow, deliberate salute. Everything stopped. The crowd went silent, as though the world itself held its breath. The casket, flag-draped, heavy with the weight of an unknown soldier, passed directly before him. Jack's salute did not waver. Inside, his chest ached. He wanted to kneel, to cry, to whisper that he was sorry they had died alone. But he did not move. He was the sentinel, and sentinels do not weep. When the procession had passed, Jack lowered his rifle with the same deliberate precision, pivoted, and resumed his walk. 21 steps, pause, 21 seconds. His breathing steadied. This was how he honored them, by not faltering. But as he reached the end of the mat, he saw something that froze him. At the edge of the crowd, a young boy no older than 10 stood at rigid attention, his hand at his forehead in an imperfect salute. His father, a veteran judging by the faded Marine cap, had tears streaming down his face. Jack's stoic mask cracked for just an instant. The boy's salute was sloppy but sincere. Jack stopped, turned toward the boy, and rendered a full, crisp salute in return. Gasps rippled through the onlookers. It was not part of the script, and in that moment, something shifted inside Jack. The ghosts were still there, but they felt lighter, as if sharing the burden with this new generation. Maybe, he thought, the watch would one day be safe in other hands. Jack's boots clicked against the hardwood floor as he stepped into his small apartment above the auto shop. The place smelled faintly of motor oil and brewed coffee, his 2 constants. He set his cap carefully on the hook by the door and shrugged out of his jacket, the creases still sharp from his morning watch. The room was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator and the muted traffic outside. For a moment, he simply stood there, shoulders heavy, letting the silence settle over him. Then he saw it. An envelope sitting squarely in the center of the kitchen table. No bills, no advertisements, just a single cream-colored envelope with his name printed in block letters. Jack froze. His pulse quickened, and a strange weight settled in his chest. He approached the table slowly, boots echoing on the wooden floor. He picked it up. The paper felt heavier than it should have, as if it carried more than ink inside. The return address stopped him cold. Department of the Army, Office of the Chief of Staff. Jack's throat tightened. He tore it open carefully, hands steady despite the sudden thrum of his heartbeat. Inside was a single folded letter and a funeral card. General Elias Thornton. The name struck him like a hammer. Thornton. The man who had once pulled Jack out of the fire, literally and figuratively, during one of the worst nights of his life. The man Jack had never properly thanked. The man who had been more mentor than commander in those brutal months overseas. The letter was simple and formal. You are respectfully invited to attend the funeral of General Elias Thornton at Arlington National Cemetery, Section 60 Amphitheater. Seating is reserved for family and those specified by the General's final directive. Jack sank into the chair. His chest felt hollow, like someone had scooped the air out of him. He stared at the card, the neat black letters announcing the date and time. He had missed so many opportunities to write, to visit, to say the words that had haunted him for years. He rose abruptly, the chair scraping across the floor. His hand found the old wooden chest under the bed. Inside lay the one thing he kept pristine, his tomb guard badge encased in velvet. He ran a thumb over the number engraved on it. No one could ever take that from him. Jack stood before the cracked mirror, looking at the man staring back at him. The lines on his face seemed deeper today, the gray at his temples more pronounced. But his eyes, those gray, unyielding eyes, still held the same resolve. He would go. He had to. Not as a spectator, not from the sidelines. If Thornton had asked for him, even in death he would stand for him one last time. The morning of the funeral broke cold and bright. Jack stood at the edge of the auto shop's gravel lot, his black sedan idling behind him. His tomb guard uniform was immaculate. Pressed trousers, shined shoes, gloves white as bone. The badge pinned above his heart gleamed faintly in the pale light. He took a deep breath, then slid into the driver's seat. The drive to Arlington felt both too short and too long. Every turn of the road brought the memory of Elias Thornton closer, and with it, the guilt Jack had carried for years. By the time he reached Memorial Drive, the air in the car felt thick. He approached the cemetery gate slowly, the rows of white headstones visible beyond the iron bars. At the security checkpoint, a young MP in a crisp uniform stepped forward, clipboard in hand. Name? Jack Harlon, he said, presenting the invitation letter. The MP scanned it, frowned, and shook his head. You're not on the clearance manifest, Jack blinked, momentarily stunned. That can't be right. I was sent this directly from the Chief of Staff's office. The MP's stance didn't soften. Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to step aside. Only those on the manifest can enter the cemetery interior for today's ceremony. Something twisted in Jack's chest. He'd worn this uniform for years, stood guard in heat and snow, represented every fallen soldier with each of his 21 steps. And now he was being told he didn't belong. Look, he said quietly, holding up the badge from his chest. I earned this on that mat. General Thornton knew me. I'm sorry, sir. The MP's voice was firm but not unkind. I have orders. Jack stepped back, jaw tight, the letter crumpling slightly in his gloved fist. Beyond the gate he could see people gathering near the amphitheater, a flash of color where the casket's flag waited under the awning. He could almost hear the muffled sound of boots and the rustle of dress uniforms. For a long moment he just stood there, staring past the bars, feeling as though the whole weight of the past pressed on his shoulders. He could leave. No one would stop him, but something in him refused. Thornton had asked for him. Even if he had to stand on the wrong side of the fence, he would stay until the last salute was given. Jack moved to the side of the gate and took position at attention, facing the road. The MP watched him warily, perhaps puzzled by the man's refusal to leave. The air grew still, the distant notes of a bugle floating from within the cemetery. Jack's chest rose and fell with slow, deliberate breaths. He would wait. The desert night exploded into fire. Jack hit the ground before he even registered the blast, ears ringing, the shockwave rolling over him like a physical thing. Dust and smoke choked the air. Somewhere to his left a Humvee burned, flames clawing at the black sky. Contact! Contact! Someone screamed over the gunfire that erupted seconds later. Jack's training kicked in. He rolled to a crouch, M4 up, scanning for movement. Tracers lanced across the road, striking sparks off the wrecked vehicles. Then he saw him, Colonel Elias Thornton, pinned halfway inside the burning Humvee, one leg caught between twisted metal. Without thinking, Jack sprinted. Bullets cracked around him, chunks of asphalt spitting up near his boots. The heat from the fire hit him before he reached the vehicle, but he didn't slow. "Hang on, sir," Jack shouted, dropping his rifle and grabbing Thornton under the arms. The metal was blistering hot. His gloves began to smoke. Thornton groaned, barely conscious. Jack pulled with everything he had. The leg wouldn't budge. The fire popped, a stream of fuel igniting in a blinding whoosh. Jack grit his teeth, braced a boot against the frame, and heaved. This time the leg came free and they both tumbled backward into the dirt. "Ramirez! Ellis, cover!" he roared. Two shapes darted from cover, laying suppressing fire downrange. Jack hauled Thornton onto his shoulders and staggered toward the alleyway. Every step felt like running through water, his breath burning in his chest, the colonel's weight dragging him down. Halfway there, another burst of gunfire cut across their path. Jack dropped to a knee, shielding Thornton with his own body. He could feel his heartbeat hammering in his ears. "Move," he told himself. "You stop, you die." He surged up, sprinting again, dragging both of them through the sand and debris. Bullets zipped past. Somewhere behind them, Ramirez shouted, then went down with a cry. Jack's stomach lurched. He turned back, cursing under his breath, and charged toward the downed private. He grabbed Ramirez by his vest, hauling him up with one arm while keeping Thornton balanced on his shoulders. The weight was crushing now, his muscles screaming, but he refused to stop. They reached the cover of a crumbled wall just as Ellis appeared, blood running down his arm but still firing bursts into the night. When Jack finally dropped to his knees behind the wall, his chest was heaving. Thornton was alive, barely, but breathing. Ramirez groaned, clutching his leg. Jack's hands shook as he reloaded his rifle. The firefight raged for another 7 minutes before air support screamed overhead and silence finally fell. In that awful stillness, Jack looked down at the colonel. Thornton's eyes fluttered open. For a moment, they simply stared at each other, dust and sweat streaking their faces. "You saved my ass," Thornton rasped. Jack swallowed hard, throat tight. "Just doing my job, sir." But inside, he knew this moment would never leave him. The morning broke over Arlington with a soft haze, wrapping the cemetery in a muted gold. Jack Harlon arrived earlier than usual, stepping onto the plaza before the relief guard even formed up. The tomb of the unknown soldier lay ahead, its white marble glinting faintly as if it too was preparing for the day. Jack adjusted the ceremonial rifle on his shoulder and let the silence settle over him. This was the anniversary of the day he had been accepted into the tomb guard platoon, an unspoken personal milestone he always honored alone. Visitors began trickling in, some holding coffee cups, others simply pausing to absorb the hushed dignity of the place. Jack watched them quietly, his face calm but inwardly touched by how even strangers seemed to understand that this ground demanded reverence. As the changing of the guard approached, Jack fell into position, his boots striking the granite with the precision of a metronome. The relief commander's voice carried across the plaza, sharp and deliberate. The ceremony began. Jack's every step felt synchronized with memory of the countless hours he had drilled, the aching muscles, the relentless repetition until perfection became instinct. He could almost hear his instructor's barked commands from years ago echoing in his mind. Halfway through the ceremony, a sudden gust of wind swept through the plaza. It caught the flag on the staff, making it snap sharply. Jack did not flinch, but something in him stirred. He thought of the men and women buried here, whose stories were forever untold, whose identities were forever surrendered. Each one had given everything, and the least he could do was give his absolute best in these 21 steps, this 21-second pause, this 21-step return. When the ceremony ended, the crowd stood in still silence before offering polite applause. But then, a boy of perhaps 8 years stepped forward, saluted clumsily, and whispered, "Thank you." His parents quickly ushered him back, embarrassed, but Jack's jaw tightened just slightly. It wasn't regulation to react, but inside, something heavy and proud bloomed in his chest. Later, after the plaza cleared, Jack remained a moment longer than necessary, standing motionless, staring at the tomb. His shift was over, but he gave one more crisp salute, this one just for himself and the fallen. Then quietly he turned and marched away, leaving the marble shining under the rising sun. The late afternoon sun slanted across Arlington, casting long shadows over the neatly aligned rows of white markers. Jack Harlon had been assigned an extra duty watch for the day, a rare occurrence, intended to test the endurance of even the most seasoned tomb guards. At first it seemed routine, the usual patrol, the familiar steps, the measured breathing. But as the hours wore on, a subtle tension began to build. Visitors had begun streaming in for the late ceremonies, and while most were quiet, one group lingered too close to the restricted area. Jack's eyes narrowed under the brim of his campaign hat. He signaled them back politely, but firmly. One man, clearly unaware of protocol, continued to inch forward, snapping photos of the tomb. Jack stepped into view, tall and imposing, the authority of years of service radiating off him. "Sir, restricted area," Jack said calmly, though his voice carried the steel of someone used to immediate compliance. The man laughed nervously, brushing it off as a joke. Jack's jaw tightened. He maintained perfect composure, remembering all the lessons drilled into him: patience, discipline, and the unwavering respect owed to the dead. The crowd held its breath, sensing the silent standoff. Meanwhile, in the background, the rustle of leaves and the distant hum of city traffic reminded Jack that time was both a friend and a threat. He could feel sweat pooling at the back of his neck despite the crisp air. Each second stretched, measured and tense, as he maintained a flawless posture, rifle at shoulder, eyes forward, heart steady. Finally, the intruder realized the gravity of the situation. He raised his hands in surrender, mumbling apologies, and retreated under Jack's vigilant gaze. The visitors were guided back by another guard, leaving Jack alone once again. The encounter had been brief, but the mental strain was heavier than any physical drill. As dusk approached, Jack's thoughts drifted to the stories he'd carried. Fallujah, the Silver Star, the men he had saved and lost. He realized that duty was never simply about marching or saluting. It was about presence, about bearing witness, about standing firm when no one else could. Tonight, he had stood that ground, alone, unyielding, embodying the very essence of honor. By the time he finally stepped off the plaza, the sky was painted with streaks of orange and purple. The cemetery, quiet once more, seemed to exhale along with him. Jack allowed himself a small nod of satisfaction. The challenge had come and passed, and he had met it with the strength of decades of service. Twilight settled over Arlington, painting the cemetery in dusky blues and purples. Jack Harlon received word from the duty officer. He had been selected for a special assignment, escorting a visiting foreign military dignitary through the tomb area. The notice was brief, delivered with a crisp salute and a reminder: precision, discipline, and vigilance, Corporal Harlon. The eyes of both nations are on you. Jack adjusted his uniform, checking the creases in his tunic and the polish of his boots. Every detail mattered. The honor of the tomb depended on flawless execution. The dignitary, a general from a NATO ally, was scheduled to arrive at 7 p.m., and the fading light left the cemetery shimmering in muted gold and silver. Jack's senses sharpened, every rustle of leaves. Every soft footstep became part of a symphony he had to master. As the motorcade approached, Jack fell into formation, rifle cradled perfectly, posture ramrod straight. The dignitary's entourage disembarked, a mix of stern faces and polished uniforms, cameras discreetly capturing every moment. Jack led them through the plaza, each step measured, each pause at the tomb deliberate, a choreography honed over years. Suddenly, a minor disturbance erupted. A stray dog darted through the rows of headstones, yapping loudly, forcing one of the aides to stumble. Time slowed for Jack. He reacted instantly, stepping between the dog and the dignitary, lowering his voice to calm it while maintaining perfect poise. The crowd of foreign officers watched silently, impressed by the seamless handling of the disruption. Jack's face betrayed no hint of stress. Only calm authority radiated from his stance. The dignitary approached the tomb, bowing respectfully. Jack ensured that the ceremonial routine was flawless: precise steps, sharp salutes, silent reverence. As the group concluded, the foreign general extended his hand to Jack, a gesture of mutual respect. Jack nodded, saluted, and held his position until the dignitary and entourage had departed, leaving him alone in the twilight once again. In the quiet aftermath, Jack allowed himself a deep breath. The challenge had been unexpected, testing not only his physical discipline but his ability to think, adapt, and maintain dignity under pressure. Twilight fell fully, stars beginning to pierce the sky. The tomb gleamed faintly under the subtle lighting, and Jack felt a quiet satisfaction. Another chapter in his lifetime of service had been written in steadfast precision and silent honor. Night had fully descended over Arlington, leaving the cemetery bathed in the soft glow of ceremonial lamps. Jack Harlon stood alone at the tomb, the echoes of the day's events still lingering in his mind. This was the final tribute, the culmination of decades of service, discipline, and silent vigilance. His uniform, perfectly pressed, glinted faintly under the lights, and his polished boots reflected the soft illumination of the marble pathways. A small group had gathered for the last ceremony, a few senior officers, family members of the fallen, and an aide carrying a meticulously wrapped ceremonial flag. Jack's eyes scanned the group briefly, then returned to the tomb, settling into the rhythm of the 21 steps he had paced countless times before. Each step was deliberate, each movement exact, embodying years of training and the weight of history. As he approached the casket of General Elias Eli Thornton, memories flooded back. The desert heat, the chaos of Fallujah, the weight of the men he had carried to safety. Jack knelt briefly, placing a gloved hand on the casket, whispering, "Rest easy, sir." His heart tightened with the remembrance of their bond, forged in fire and tempered by unspoken loyalty. The ceremony began in earnest. The chaplain's voice resonated through the amphitheater, offering solemn prayers. Rifles cracked 7 volleys, the notes sharp and precise, followed by the mournful sound of taps. Jack remained at attention, unwavering, the embodiment of honor and remembrance. Eyes of visitors followed his movements, sensing the silent weight he carried, an invisible thread connecting past sacrifices to the present. Suddenly, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, Hawk Whitaker, appeared. His presence commanded respect, and all eyes turned as he walked to Jack's side. "Corporal Harlon," he said, voice steady yet warm, "you carry more than duty tonight. You carry a legacy." With a subtle gesture, Hawk signaled security to open the pathway, allowing Jack to carry the casket of his fallen friend forward, a symbolic act, fulfilling the promise made 14 years prior in the dust of Iraq. The family watched silently as Jack led the casket to its final resting place. The flag draped over the casket cast gentle shadows, the soft light highlighting the solemnity of the moment. Lena Thornton's eyes glistened with unspoken understanding, recognizing the debt of loyalty her father had carried and the one Jack honored tonight. As the urn was placed and the final soil sifted over it, Jack folded his hands, head bowed. He retrieved the note Eli had left, words of gratitude and trust, a reminder that some debts could never be repaid, only honored. Jack tucked it carefully into his tunic, close to his heart, and stepped back. The cemetery was silent except for the whisper of the wind through the trees, carrying a faint scent of earth and memory. Jack stood for a final moment, saluting the empty space where his friend had been laid to rest. His duty complete, he turned toward the exit, carrying the quiet satisfaction of a life spent in service. Across the distance, Arlington remained a testament to courage, sacrifice, and honor, principles Jack had lived by, and now, in his final act of tribute, had exemplified for all to see.